looking at how farmer-centric demand, finance and production incentives work together, the way they connect. And there's a very fascinating research report which Julian Lambin and Yasmin Paul of Kite Insights are going to take us through in a few minutes' time, giving us recommendations, because it's not just what we've been doing over the last 4.5 years. It's also what can be taken from those activities and can improve the operations of future integrated approach-based projects. So do introduce yourselves in the chat box, and do also rename yourselves in the little 3 dots at the top right-hand corner of your video box, so that we know which organization you're from. The session is being recorded. If you have any questions as we're running through, then or any technical questions, technical problems, then do put something in the chat box and we'll help you out with that. And let's now go to look at the agenda. So if we take the next slide, I can take you through what we're going to be doing together. So we're in the welcome and introductions at the moment. We'll have an overview of the Good Growth Partnership from Pascal Bonzon, the global manager of the partnership. And then from Julian and Yasmin, the presentation on the integrated approach. And then we're going to mine your brains to find out what lessons you would like to apply and what you've learned from this GGP information we're giving you. So we're going to a couple of breakout groups there to discuss that towards the end of our time together, so that we not only have the wisdom that's come through the report, but also the wisdom that comes from all the people who are joining us on this workshop. And then we'll have a closing discussion and some calls to action of what to do next. So that's how the next hour and a half looks like it's going to pan out. Time now to hand over to Pascal Bonzon. She's going to tell us all about GGP, the Good Growth program that we're going to be looking at, and where all of these integrated approach lessons come from. So Pascal, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be with you today to launch and discuss our GGP integrated approach knowledge product. Colleagues from Kite will delve into the report and its key insights, but I would like to tell you a bit about the Good Growth Partnership by means of introduction and stage settings. So GGP, as you can see from the logo lockup on the top right, is a partnership between UNDP, Conservation International, IFC, UNEP, and WWF, seeking to reduce deforestation from key agricultural commodities production to increase climate change mitigation, adaptation, and biodiversity conservation. As you can see on the map, it is active in palm oil in Indonesia and Liberia, in soy in Brazil, and in beef in Paraguay. In its pilot phase, which is ending in June this year, it was funded by the Global Environment Facility under GEF6. GGP piloted an integrated supply chain approach, which involves working through the primary functions and driving forces in the commodity supply chain, production, demand, and finance. So we work simultaneously to promote sustainable production by enabling responsible transactions and generating demand for sustainable products in the soy, beef, and palm oil supply chains. As we work in an integrated manner throughout the supply chain, and given that commodities supply chains are global in nature, we work through multi-scale, meaning we work at the global, national, and subnational levels. We also work in a multi-stakeholder fashion, so we work with the whole range of actors needed at each level. As you can see from the bottom of the slide, on the production side, we work on fostering sustainable production and land use. We do this through support to policy reform, ensuring that production happens away from high carbon stock and high conservation value areas. We also support producers to adopt more sustainable production practices that allows them to achieve sustainable intensification while increasing their resilience to climate change. On the demand side, we work with traders, manufacturers, and retailers to build their commitment and capacity to sustainable sourcing. And we increase the transparency of supply chains through supporting tools such as Trace. On the transaction side, we work with financial institutions to increase their capacity to make financial transaction decisions based on environment, social, and governance, including forest risks. And we support access to finance for companies following IFC's performance standards. We do all this through facilitating multi-stakeholder action and sharing knowledge. And you can see some of our results to date. So they've been pretty nice, actually. As of now, we have over 847,000 hectares of high carbon stock and high conservation areas, high conservation value areas protected in production landscapes, which results into over 129 million of CO2 emissions avoided. This has been made possible through the multi-stakeholder action plans that we have facilitated, 9 of them, and the policies that we have supported, 28 of them, related to sustainable production and land use. And of course, we have been engaging the private sector, 98 of them, and we have been supporting the identification and the development of financial tools and products, 43 of them. And we have been making good use of our global community of practice of 200 practitioners, the Green Commodities community. So I'll stop there, Simon, and I think we're going to go into a poll now, right?
Yes, indeed we are. First piece of audience interaction. So here's our check-in polling question, because we want to know what level of expertise we have in the room. So 4 choices there for your familiarity with the integrated approach, or I should say plural integrated approaches, because of course there is more than one way of doing this. So when the poll comes up, you can click not very familiar if you've not worked on or studied integrated approaches at all. If you're familiar with concept and theory, then let us know. And then you've got practical experience of working as part of one or more integrated approaches. So have you actually got hands-on experience, or are you very familiar? If you are in that category, then click the last one. So let's just quickly see what sort of figure we get as our attendees click through. So lots of people with practical experience at the moment. Almost half of our population have got that. A few people are newbies, and then a few are familiar, but not yet with hands-on. So if you haven't voted yet, please do click the button. We'll give it another 10 seconds or so before we move on to the presentation of the results themselves. So that's good. I think we're looking like we have a group of people who are practically experienced with integrated approaches. So it'll be interesting to find out in the breakout session later on just which part of what we present, or which parts in plural of what we present, really resonate with you as people who've had experience of doing this. So thank you for that. I think we'll end the poll now, and we'll move on now to our presentation. First of all, an overview of Kite Insights' work, and then looking at the report in detail. So as they'll explain, Julian and Yasmin from Kite Insights, Julian Lambin and Yasmin Paul, do have history with this part of the UNDP. They've worked for us on previous research projects, which have gone down very well with the audience. And it's time now to hand over to Julian to take us through an introduction to the organization and also to the results of the investigation they've been doing for us. Julian, over to you.
Thanks so much, Simon. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you. Yeah, as noted, my name is Julian Lambin. I'm the head of research and knowledge at Kite Insights, and joined by my colleague Yasmin. We are a strategic communications and research agency. We've been working with international institutions, NGOs, and the private sector for over a decade now in the pursuit of what we call thoughtful action on the issues that matter. What that really means is, through a research-driven approach, we help to find new insights and, crucially, to put those at the service of the challenges that we're trying to address collectively, including climate change, biodiversity loss, and also issues like diversity and inclusion. We don't just do this through reports. We also design and deliver convenings, from large-scale conferences at COP, for example, through to smaller expert working groups. We support a number of inter-industry coalitions that are working on complex challenges together. And we also deliver training to workforces on how to address and understand issues like climate change in the context of their specific roles and of their industries. As Simon mentioned, we've had the privilege of working with the UNDP Green Commodities Programme for over 4 years. For example, we've helped produce a piece of research on reports on the importance of horizontal and vertical integration and alignment between levels of action to support systemic change in commodities production. We've also worked with the Value Beyond Value Chains initiative, which is focused on promoting private sector engagement with governments at national and subnational levels on these issues. We've been lucky to speak with lots of other leading organizations and individuals in sustainable commodities, some of whom I can see on this call. Lovely to see you again. And most recently, we've been supporting this project with the Good Growth Partnership, which we're here to talk to you about today. So very quickly on the research itself, the GGP has been learning throughout its 5 years of existence. And what this research has really sought to do was to build on the lessons and experience that are already gathered and to contextualize them in a wider understanding, first of the theory and current practice of integrated approaches to sustainable commodities and other similar challenges, and also to unpack the specific achievements of the GGP to date. Our analysis really focused at 2 connected levels. First is the conceptual, so what are the features of a well-conceived integrated approach? What kinds of challenges are they suited to addressing? And given that criteria, what can we say about the GGP's own configuration and achievements today? And then secondly, we looked at the operational, which is more delivering the integrated approach in practice. So focusing on what it takes to turn a concept into reality and looking at the challenges that emerge throughout a project and recommendations that practitioners could follow to mitigate or address those. To do all that, we've conducted an extensive review of the GGP's documentation and lessons, as well as external literature, conducted case studies of other integrated approaches, took part in multiple convenings, and conducted interviews with over 35 GGP partners and a wide range of other experts and practitioners. And the result is this new report, which we hope you enjoy reading, Integrated Approaches to Reduce Deforestation, Learning and Recommendations from the Good Growth Partnership. Now, Yasmin's going to take you through the first part of the report, which is the conceptual features of the integrated approach and of the GGP.
Thank you, Julian, Pascal, and Simon for setting the scene, and hello, everyone. Really excited to be here sharing some learnings from this research with you today. I'm going to zoom out now to some of the theory underpinning integrated approaches, which you'll probably find a little bit abstract, but we're also going to try and ground this in practical examples and then speak a bit later on in more of a practical context relating to some of your own work. Something we discovered quite early in the desk research and in our conversations with many practitioners is that the concept of an integrated approach is quite loosely defined and sometimes poorly understood, even by people who are implementing them or have worked on them previously. Very broadly speaking, an integrated approach can be defined as one which considers a whole system rather than parts or layers within a system, in which interventions addressing different components and drivers and involving different stakeholders are designed or managed together with a goal of creating additionality or added value. The term integrated approach has often been applied to interventions that have both an environmental and a social dimension. And as some of you may know, it's been widely used in the context of integrated natural resource management. You can see on this slide 4 core pillars. These have been adapted from a conceptual framework for integrated environmental management, which was initially developed in the 90s. Based on this framework and on our extensive wider research, an integrated approach should therefore define and focus on a whole system rather than an element or elements of it. At the same time, it should identify and address specific components and drivers of change in that system in a strategic way. It should work with the connections and links, the feedback loops between key parts within that system, and encourage interaction and collaboration between different actors to create synergies and additionality through these connections. So if you have any other ways that you think an integrated approach should be defined, we'd be interested to hear them, or any other key characteristics. So feel free to post any thoughts in the chat as we're talking. So beyond the GGP, there are many other integrated approaches out there, and they do seem to be getting better from what we've read of some of the earliest ones, some of which were critiqued. And this is another reason that the GGP has sought to test its proof of concept for the integrated supply chain approach, which is seen as a new vehicle for delivering systemic change. As some of you will know, the GGP was one of 3 integrated approach pilots that were developed and co-financed by the Global Environment Facility, the other 2 being focused on food security and on sustainable cities. And the GEF is continuing to promote and fund integrated approaches in recognition of the additionality they bring to address global environmental challenges. Another example of a recent integrated approach is the Collaboration for Forests and Agriculture, which was funded by the Moore Foundation. And similarly to the GGP, this also addresses production, finance, and private sector engagement as some of its configuration. So we'll look now at how the GGP was designed to address these similar focal areas in an integrated way. Deforestation, as you know, is a complex systemic challenge, and it just doesn't have a simple silver bullet solution that can fix them at scale and in the longer term. So a core argument for integrated approaches like the GGP is their ability to tackle these very complex and systemic challenges. And the GGP really set out to transform the wider commodities system instead of just one aspect of it. For example, with a place-based project that might be focused on sustainable production in a target landscape, as many interventions you might be familiar with are designed, or like an intervention that improves sustainable demand or financing for a specific commodity with a private sector focus. So to bring strategic focus for this pilot, the GGP successfully defined the boundaries of the system it was working with by focusing on key commodity supply chains, palm oil, soil and beef, as you've heard, grounded in priority landscapes and countries which these commodities are sourced from, as Pascal highlighted earlier. It featured place-based interventions at a variety of scales, from eco-regions and smaller landscapes to subnational political jurisdictions. And it's really focused on the linkages and connections between different actors and components in these supply chains to identify and address the interconnected drivers of deforestation and unsustainable production together rather than separately. And this focus on the key levers of change in the system really allowed the GGP to align and activate key enablers and incentives that then had the power to shift the decisions and behaviors of stakeholders right across these supply chains, right from the landscape level up to the global level. Addressing not only production, but upstream drivers such as finance and technical assistance, which are perversely often more available for unsustainable agriculture than sustainable agriculture. And then at the same time, addressing downstream drivers such as demand from commodity buyers. It successfully enabled shifts towards sustainable production that are more likely to endure. So in Indonesia, for example, the GGP increased farmers' capacities to shift to sustainable practices, while increasing consumer demand for sustainable palm oil and building the capacity of financial institutions to invest sustainably and screen out deforesters. And crucially, the GGP has focused on fostering collaboration between diverse stakeholders, creating platforms for dialogue, for knowledge exchange, for example, ensuring the voices and needs of rural producers are considered in land use zoning decisions, and facilitating opportunities for different actors to build on, amplify, and complement each other's work, rather than duplicating or competing with each other. In Brazil's Mato Piba region, the GGP, for example, has helped to establish partnerships between supply chain stakeholders to improve traceability, risk screening, land use monitoring. So one of the key questions this research set out to answer is whether the GGP has demonstrated a proof of concept for this integrated supply chain approach. And we found that the concept has been proved, both through the achievements of the program that Pascal highlighted earlier, and through validation from the many stakeholders we consulted. However, many lessons were learned on how to translate the initial theory of change into practice, which happened after the program commenced, when it began to encounter practical challenges and barriers that hadn't been anticipated when it was designed. For example, codependencies relating to the time it takes to build trust in collaboration or to secure resources, or unexpected changes in direction, such as policy reforms or the COVID-19 pandemic. So in response, the GGP evolved and adapted as it progressed. The adaptive management and learning component of the program, which was embedded in the GGP's design, has been really instrumental in enabling this agility, which in turn has helped to improve successful outcomes. As part of this process, it created an adaptive management database, which has over 50 entries that illustrate strategic changes and decisions taken to respond to these challenges. Partway through, it also started bringing more systems thinking and methods into the program. So for example, in the Cerrado, a systems mapping exercise helped to identify key areas for intervention, also potential synergies between partners and country teams. Mindsets and ways of working have also become increasingly collaborative, both at country levels and global levels. And this has really been facilitated through increased opportunities for dialogue and exchange, including through the green commodities community and through the development of tools such as Evidencia and Trace. We've also talked about how the GGP's multi-scalar, and another evolution has been improved integration between the focus on the supply chain and between jurisdictional or landscape approaches. So while there can be gaps in supply chain approaches, for example, missing key local or regional actors, and there can be gaps in landscape or jurisdictional approaches, which might miss out key parts of the supply chain operating at different scales, such as financial actors or commodity buyers. Finding the right kind of balance between a place-based and a supply chain focus has really been a key learning for the GGP going forward, among many other practical insights revealed in this research, as Julian's going to tell you more about now.
Thanks very much, Yasmin. So I think, as Yasmin's already mentioned, there's quite a big difference between concept and delivering a concept in reality. And we spent a lot of time trying to understand the experience of different partners in the GGP itself during the design and implementation of the program. And also, as I mentioned, looked at a number of other integrated programs to understand key drivers of success. And what emerged from that analysis are 5 core transformational practices that we find underpin the effective delivery of an integrated approach. These are practices that were consistently highlighted by different experts and practitioners, different partners, and that cut across and summarize many of the more specific recommendations that the report also highlights. So integrated programs interact with a wide variety of stakeholders, as we've talked about, including governments, producers, and the private sector. And so the first essential practice is really about establishing inclusive and collaborative spaces in which stakeholders can interact with each other, can build trust, and agree collaborative actions. And of course, integrated programs also consist of a wide variety of implementing partners and collaborators. And so the second transformative practice we highlight is centered on ensuring the consistent and quality participation of those partners. And this involves making sure that partners can interact at all levels and between levels and have the capacities, resources, and mandates they need to do so. Thirdly, we highlight that partners need to embrace systemic thinking and tools to support the design and informed decision-making during implementation, as well as serving as the basis for monitoring and evaluation, adaptation, and learning. And alongside that, they also need to adapt agile processes for recognizing and adapting to dynamics in the systems that their program is seeking to change. And I think, as Yasmin has mentioned, that the adaptation and learning project of the GGP is a really good example of this kind of process, which has helped the project to respond to its own lessons as they emerge. And also related to this, lastly, we highlight the importance of using innovative tools and measures of progress that focus on real-world impact and incentivize programs to focus on transformation over output, and that are capable of capturing systemic change. The UNDP and GGP partners have developed a number of frameworks and tools for measuring aspects of systemic change, such as mindset shifts. This includes the Ladders of Change framework, for example, which I'm sure colleagues will be happy to share more about with you. Now let's go to the next level of detail if we can. As I've mentioned, we looked at each stage of a project lifecycle for integrated approaches, from design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and adaptation and learning. And here I'm going to run you through some examples of challenges that can be experienced and some of the tools and recommendations from the report that can help address them. This isn't a comprehensive list of challenges, certainly not, nor of the recommendations made in the report, but it should illustrate some of the value that these can provide in a variety of contexts. Before I go further, if you can, I'd suggest entering full screen for this part of the presentation at least, so that some of the smaller pieces of text are easy for you to read. So let's start at the global or the steering committee level. During design at this level, some of the challenges that might arise include, for example, a focus on certain conceptions of output or of impact. And there may also be reticence to build in and allow for flexibility in a program's theory of change and ways of working, which are needed ultimately to account for the specific dynamics, for example, in a given landscape or region. And these kind of challenges, if they're not addressed, can really have a lasting and hindering impact on a program. So here we highlight the importance of the development of a theory of change that does create the appropriate balance between levers and between levels of change, and the importance of adopting frameworks and tools that account for the fact that change will happen at different pace, in different ways, in different places and parts of the project. To reach this kind of configuration, you need bottom-up and participative design processes, and tools like conceptual design tools and systems methods can help to develop the right sets of indicators and support adaptation and delivery plans. We also highlight the potential of a bank of neutral facilitators, for example, to support these consultative processes. And we know facilitation is so essential to so many of these multi-stakeholder processes, including internal ones. The result of these efforts could, for example, be the development of nested theories of change that account for the local dynamics in each place that a program, an integrated approach like this is operating, but still based and grounded in an overall global theory of change. Next, we can think of some of the challenges that might emerge in specific projects of a program. Here we're using the components of the GGP, but of course they can be different. Challenges could include a lack of time and resources to engage with the collaborative processes that are an essential component of integrated programs. As implementation progresses, specific projects may struggle to track how their activities are influencing other parts of the program. And in some instances, projects might be stuck, waiting for other outcomes to emerge before they can start with specific activities. To address or head off these challenges, you need the appropriate roles and resourcing, as I've mentioned, within and between project teams, so that they can spend the time to understand each other's ways of working and establish shared ownership of goals and processes. And tools like future methods, as well as data collection systems. And we've seen great examples, for example, of platforms in which individual projects can input results, but then see them in an automated fashion in the context of wider program indicators. And these kind of tools can help integrated programs to anticipate what forms of change might occur and when, helping projects that are dependent on each other's outcomes to still progress efficiently and to generate a consistent picture of progress. And there's simple tools as well that you can be used and that can really bolster programs, like creating shared communications and newsletters that help build the shared understanding between teams of what's going on and the overall changes they're contributing to. Other challenges can emerge at a country or jurisdictional or landscape levels. As we've mentioned, inflexible global level theories of change can be out of sync with the realities of a specific commodity or place. And other times, country teams or indeed global teams may not have the time or mandate to interact with other partners, or they might not be familiar with systems, methods, and other tools. As noted already, participative bottom-up processes and systems mapping exercise conducted during design with the participation of people at this level in the specific supply chains and places in which a program will be operating can help make these kinds of inflexible situations less likely. And integrated programs also need to invest in cross-cutting knowledge building and sharing, including around the concept of integrated approaches themselves, to build the capacity of multiple organizations and groups of actors at once around key concepts like systemic change, we really find that it's one of the benefits the GGP has created, is to help align the asks and language being used by multiple actors. So when interacting with businesses or governments, those stakeholders don't feel like they're receiving 5 different asks. They're hearing one language and one set of demands or requests. Here's another example of some challenges at a jurisdictional or country level. In some cases, outcomes achieved in one aspect of a project, in this example, a production-focused project, might struggle to connect to companies engaged through demand projects. At the same time, a project may be achieving something that wasn't initially foreseen or included in the reporting framework of the project, or conversely, an aspect of their work may not be progressing at the pace that was initially expected. Some solutions could include including more qualitative stories of change, for example, into reporting frameworks, or in relation to the unforeseen delays here, tools like governance weakness mapping might have helped to pre-identify barriers that were likely to emerge from the lack of engagement from certain stakeholders and put in place adaptation plans to deal with that. Now, properly functioning integrated programs also require that country or jurisdictional or landscape teams are connecting to the global and supply level components of programs, and ensuring these upward and downward connections exist, which of course, as we've said, requires the investment of time and resources. Could, for example, help our friends here who've successfully bolstered sustainable production in a landscape to connect to farmers there, to international finance, or to buyers for their products. And with that, I want to thank you for listening, and thank you to all the partners of the GGP again for their trust in us in conducting this research, and for the invitation also to participate in this conversation today. I hope that what we've shared here gives you a taste of the potential of integrated approaches and confidence that good practice from which to learn and deliver these programs is out there. We really encourage you to look at the report, where a lot more detail, a lot more examples and real case studies can also be found. I think just as a general reflection, we note this in the report, but we face a paradox that on the one hand, instigating the kind of deep systemic change that the GGP seeks to takes time, but on the other hand, we really need to achieve an awful lot of transformation towards sustainability at a really exceptional pace in the coming years. I think the GGP pilot for us has demonstrated the important role and additionality that these kinds of integrated approaches can contribute to that kind of systemic transformation. At the same time, it's helped dismiss the idea that programs of this complexity necessarily diminish agility. So we're looking forward to taking part in the group discussions. We hope you enjoy reading the full report, and we're very excited to see how the GGP and indeed many other programs take these insights and recommendations forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Yasmin. Fascinating. If you haven't looked at your chat, then you'll see, if you do click the chat on, that 3 blocks up is the download link for the report. We'll email it to you anyway at the end of the workshop. But if you want to take a look at the report, it's there in a link from Lavinia in the chat side. So do access that, and you'll see all of the rich detail that Julian and Yasmin have come up with. So it's time now to move on to our second poll, and we're going to mine your thoughts again. Looking back at what Julian and Yasmin have presented, there are a number of challenges that they had that came up in their slides, and there are 4 of them there: measuring and reporting frameworks that don't work, also the lack of aligned language and approaches between collaborators, lack of vertical integration between levels of action and parts of a supply chain, or lack of horizontal integration between actors working on the same issues in the same places. That, of course, those last 2 were a key part of the 4-dimensional systemic change report that we issued a while ago. So do vote now for which of the following challenges have you most frequently experienced. So which of these has most frequently got in the way as far as your experience is concerned? You remember in poll 1, we found out that the majority of people on this workshop have got hands-on experience of integrated approaches. So just tell us in a quick straw poll, which of those 4 are the ones that most get in the way for you? So vertical integration and horizontal integration, level pegging at the moment, the lack of those. Lack of aligned language and approaches. I think that's very interesting. If you go to some of the multi-stakeholder meetings, you really do have very different tribes, very different people from different worlds coming into a room. And at the end of the session, they understand each other rather more. Partly language, partly worldviews, just a way of using multi-stakeholder processes to bring people together into a common understanding. So horizontal integration seems to be winning just by a nose, the lack of horizontal integration between actors working on the same issues or working in the same places. That's 32%, lack of vertical integration going up and down the supply chain at 26%, and lack of aligned language, level pegging at equal second, with that result coming up. The collaborators not really understanding what each other are talking about because of that lack of aligned language. So thank you for that input, all very useful in increasing our understanding of how we can make integrated approaches work better. As Julian and Yasmin said, GGP has demonstrated a proof of concept for an integrated approach, and we're going to move now into a couple of breakout groups. Yeah, it certainly sounds like a great discussion in that room, and there was a great discussion in our room as well. So let's bring all those together with reports back from our rapporteurs. So let's start with Lindsay Knowles-Larson from the World Bank, who's our rapporteur for Group 1, and frightened me when she joined the group and her microphone didn't work. But anyway, it's all fine now. So tell us what happened in that first group, Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Simon. It was a really good discussion. And in this group, we focused on how we can take key findings and lessons learned from GGP and this report in particular into the FOLR Impact Program, which for those of you who aren't familiar is a GEF7 impact program that's led by the World Bank and benefits from a number of core partners in the room today, including UNDP and GGP, WWF, FAO, CI, and I'm sure there are others present. So it's a nice opportunity to, as I think Simon and Pascal noted earlier in the program, to really build off of these good learnings. And so we noted in our discussion that both of these programs have horizontal and vertical components. Essentially, they're really complex, and they do try to adopt the integrated approach in practice. Unlike GGP, FOLR has less discrete supply chain interventions in the sense that we have the opportunity to look across 8 commodity value chains and identify where we can work to improve sustainability simultaneously. So it might not just be a demand-focused intervention or a production-focused intervention, but really seeing where FOLR can add value across multiple pieces. Under FOLR, there are country projects, and 27 in fact, so it's a big undertaking. And one thing that we discussed in the group was really the importance of creating sub-regional and commodity-focused groups as a way to share lessons learned and learn in real time about how this integrated approach can work on the ground when you're trying to engage public and private sector at once constructively. We heard specifically from members of the Peru FOLR country project to build on that private and public sector collaborative focus. My understanding is that the project has really worked hard to bring a lot of existing multi-stakeholder processes and initiatives that were funded by GEF6 and other bilateral funding over the years to really build on what already exists in country with a focus on priority commodities and actors. And they're creating a roundtable of public and private sector actors to take a look at the territorial approach that's strategic. So that is what's already going on in the coffee production space in the region, and where can FOLR make a strategic value add. So I think this model is one that we'd seek to promote through the other FOLR country projects and reflect some of the key takeaways of this report, to do really good initial mapping and seek to integrate yourselves into what's already going on in country and in and in region. As was noted in the discussion, there really is a challenge that I think GGP struggled with too in terms of the project gestation period, and that when we aim for integration, it can be tricky in practice because you have different stakeholders moving at different speeds. Some may be ready to go, whereas others require a lot more time to proceed with interventions. And finally, in thinking about gaps, we discussed the limitations of using a linear theory of change and the broader issues of shifting institutional perspectives on how to be adaptive when you're designing, implementing, and measuring a complex intervention like FOLO or like GGP. And that in order to shift away from that linear positivistic view, you really need to have a mindset change all the way from funder to implementer. And so those were some of the elements of discussion that we had, some of the key takeaways, and certainly welcome other inputs on behalf of the FOLR Impact Program about how we can improve our interventions. Thanks so much, Simon.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, certainly in those 5 transformational practices that came up in the slide deck, that number 4, adopting agile adaptive processes for recognizing and adapting to dynamics in the system that the program is seeking to change. You know, that isn't just something you do once. Of course, it's something you come back to again and again. And that was one of the big conclusions in the discussion, that we should really focus on that. No, don't just think you've got it sorted and you're going to go ahead with the program. Make sure you have really good sensitivity to how the changes you're trying to make are reacting to the processes you're putting in place. So for group 2, I think we have Jairo. Are you there, Jairo, to give us your hello? Good to see you again. You're going to give us your summary of what happened in group 2. Thanks.
Gracias a ti, Simón. Muchas gracias, Lindsay, por los aportes. Y muchas gracias a Julian y a Yasmín por la valiosa exposición. Nuestro grupo, y voy a continuar en castellano, tuvo varias observaciones interesantes cuando hablamos de los desafíos. Voy a resumirlo en palabras que creo que van a resonar en todos y en todas. Tiempo. El tiempo de 4 años puede ser un tiempo limitado para lograr cambios sistémicos en, valga la redundancia, sistemas tan complejos como los agrícolas, ganaderos que existen. Herramientas es otro de los grandes retos. Las herramientas con las que contamos en este momento, diferentes a las generadas por el GCP, son herramientas predictivas y lineales. Datos. Hablamos también de la importancia de la generación de información que permita, pues, sistematizar el efecto que están teniendo las acciones desde el ámbito sistémico. Hablamos también acerca de tiempo y coincido con lo que mencionaba ahorita Lindsay, hablando del ciclo de vida del proyecto. Se mencionaba acerca de la necesidad de ampliar los tiempos de planificación para poder tener un abordaje más íntegro de la problemática que se atiende a raíz de los proyectos. Hablamos también acerca de la necesidad de construcción de lenguaje común, de poder tener términos que nos permitan trabajar de manera conjunta. Y hablamos también de personas. De hecho, dentro del tema de personas, hablamos acerca de pues el reto que significa poder incorporar y alinear al sector comprador y al sector institucional, dadas las diferencias que existen precisamente en el nivel en que se logra abrazar o incorporar el pensamiento sistémico y complejo y las herramientas que ha venido generando el GCP en su proceso. También hablamos entre los temas pues acerca del reto que significa lograr una coincidencia y una coordinación entre las diferentes partes que componen una cadena de suministros, de la importancia de que las señales de mercado correspondan a las exigencias que se está teniendo con el sector productivo. Y finalmente creo que hablamos un poco acerca de las diferentes lecciones que hemos tenido pues a lo largo de estos procesos y en la mayoría de los casos pues tenían que ver precisamente con la dificultad de poder articular a los diferentes sectores y actores en torno a los cambios sistémicos que se tienen que dar y en torno a los recursos que se requieren para lograr estos cambios sistémicos. Y para cerrar, creo que también es importante pues mencionar acerca de la necesidad que hay también de que estas herramientas pues puedan permear precisamente a esos sectores más reacios al cambio en el estilo de planificación o en el estilo de ejecución de los proyectos. Y hablamos acerca tanto del sector productivo, que es el que lleva la mayor carga del cambio, pero también hablamos de los organismos que nos proveen financiamiento para el desarrollo de este tipo de iniciativas y como muchas veces nos enfrentamos a marcos lógicos estrictos y lineales cuando estamos buscando generar cambios a través del enfoque de sistemas y de complejidad. Creo que eso fue todo. Si algo se me quedó entre el tintero, me disculpo con los compañeros y compañeras y adelante y muchas gracias por el tiempo.
Thank you, Jairo. That's great. And certainly that point about the timescale that people work to has come up in all of our conversations. And something that you mentioned there about how do we get all this to trickle down to every level of the system. We're very aware that the language that we use in these reports is not the sort of thing you would read on a farm in Paraguay. So how do we get that information to the people who need to have it literally on the ground? So we're looking at various ways of doing that, including video. We have a very wise crowd here. So as you know, we're very good at plumbing into the wisdom of the crowd. So one last question, and this isn't a poll for you, it's please write it in the chat box. What we'd like to ask you as we go into the closing part is that question there. Please share one thing that you would do differently in your project or work based on what you have learned in this workshop. And if you could enter that into the chat, then that will give us some information to put together at the end of the process and maybe add to the learning that we already have in the report. And certainly for me, it would be that understanding of different people's timelines. I think the slide that came up from Yasmin and Julian talking about a common language amongst participants, I think there's very clearly a need for an understanding, not necessarily to achieve a common timeline, because that's impossible, but to achieve a common understanding of people's timelines. I think that's something that I would fill in the chat box if I was doing it. So we're moving into our closing part of our session now, and I'm going to hand over to Pascal Bonzom, thanking all of our presenters and particularly you, the participants as well, for taking part in a very fruitful 90-minute workshop. Pascal, if you'd like to wrap up for us and maybe talk about the next steps in what we're going to do together.
Absolutely, Simon, and thank you. So yeah, what should you do next? Well, first of all, download and read the report. It is available on the GGP website. Second, you could also join the Green Commodities community. If you haven't already, you have the website here, and you are going to be able on that community to engage with others and continue discussions on the learnings from this integrated approach pilot. And you know, on the integrated approach itself, but on many of its granular issues. And so yeah, I encourage you to join this Green Commodities community. And of course, if you have points that you want to reach out to us directly, to the authors of the report, to myself or the GGP team, do not hesitate to do that. As you heard, the GGP in its first pilot phase is coming to a close soon. But as you also know, we are not done yet, and we are continuing through the FOLUR and its global platform. So this is the GEF7 impact program on food systems, land use and restoration. As Lindsay mentioned it, we are continuing to play a role, and we hope to, of course, through it, through the country projects, the 27 continue to pass on some of these good practices and tools that we've developed under GGP. So with that, I'm passing back to Simon to close.
Thank you, Pascal. Yes, I think we're going to donate 3 minutes back to the world, which is good. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your contributions to the breakout groups. Thank you for your contributions to the chat, which we'll be saving to make sure that we get to see all of that wisdom on the page as well as on the computer screen. Whether it's the afternoon, the morning, or the evening for you, thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Green Commodities Community Gathering. Thank you.
Thank you.